The case of Ahsoka Tano provides one of the earliest empirical indicators that the Jedi Order was undergoing institutional deterioration prior to its collapse. Her developmental trajectory during the Clone Wars intersects directly with several structural weaknesses within the Order: political entanglement, philosophical rigidity, procedural inconsistency, and escalating operational demands. Because Ahsoka entered the Order during a period of systemic stress rather than stability, her observations function as a diagnostic record of dysfunction the Council either minimized or misinterpreted. Ahsoka's early missions reveal discrepancies between Jedi doctrine and Jedi conduct. She was instructed that the Jedi were peacekeepers, yet her first assignments placed her in active combat operations. The contrast between stated values and enacted procedures created cognitive dissonance, particularly when senior Jedi justified battlefield decisions that contradicted non-violence teachings. These contradictions were not isolated behaviors. They reflected the Order's widening gap between normative philosophy and wartime practice. Throughout the war, Ahsoka witnessed the transformation of Jedi involvement from advisory roles to command positions. This shift was not formally debated within the Order and lacked ethical justification consistent with Jedi tradition. Ahsoka's exposure to this transition provided clear evidence that the Order had allowed political conditions to override religious identity. Her observations align with broader historiographic analyses showing that the Jedi forfeited institutional autonomy the moment they accepted generalship over the clone battalions. Ahsoka's interactions with clone troopers further highlighted inconsistencies in Jedi ethical frameworks. Although Jedi teachings emphasized respect for all life, the Council accepted the Republic's use of a genetically engineered army without documented concern for clone autonomy, lifespan, or consent. Ahsoka's close relationship with the clones demonstrated that she registered their humanity more clearly than many senior Jedi who viewed the battalions primarily as strategic resources. This disparity indicated an emerging moral desensitization within the Order. Another major factor contributing to Ahsoka's early recognition of institutional decline involved the Council's diminishing capacity for self-reflection. During missions such as the Second Battle of Geonosis, Ahsoka observed strategic failures that stemmed from overconfidence, insufficient intelligence, and rigid adherence to outdated assumptions. Despite repeated operational errors, the Council rarely conducted substantive reviews of their positions. This unwillingness to re-evaluate policy signaled procedural stagnation. Ahsoka's training also exposed her to inconsistencies in mentorship behaviors. Anakin Skywalker, her master, demonstrated improvisational combat strategy and strong emotional investment in outcomes, which contrasted sharply with the Council's emphasis on detachment and uniformity. The Order tolerated Anakin's deviations because they needed his effectiveness in the war, while simultaneously criticizing comparable behaviors in others. Ahsoka recognized this double standard long before her trial, marking her awareness of uneven application of Jedi norms. Her participation in prolonged military campaigns produced additional evidence that the Jedi were drifting from traditional doctrine. As missions increasingly required coercive interventions, detainment operations, and civilian oversight roles, the Jedi became agents of Republic enforcement rather than facilitators of negotiation. Ahsoka encountered numerous planetary populations who viewed the Jedi less as impartial mediators and more as instruments of Republic control. These external perceptions provided early data regarding declining trust in the Order. The behavior of the Council during politically sensitive missions further demonstrated bureaucratic pressures influencing Jedi decisions. Ahsoka witnessed instances in which Council members deferred to Senate expectations or military logistical demands rather than making determinations grounded in Jedi ethics. She interpreted these patterns correctly as evidence that the Order's decision-making authority was no longer independent. The ideological rigidity of the Jedi became increasingly apparent to Ahsoka as the war continued. She observed how senior members dismissed alternative perspectives and adhered strictly to interpretive traditions rooted in centuries-old doctrine. The refusal to revise philosophical frameworks despite new wartime realities indicated institutional ossification. This rigidity later shaped the Council's judgment during her trial, reinforcing her conclusion that the Order could no longer adapt to evolving conditions. Ahsoka also recognized that the Jedi were becoming reactive instead of proactive. Their strategic posture throughout the war consistently lagged behind Sith initiatives. They responded to crises only after significant damage had already occurred. Her direct involvement in missions such as the pursuit of Darth Maul demonstrated that the Jedi lacked a clear understanding of their adversaries' long-term strategies. The inability to anticipate threats reflected deteriorating analytical capacity within the Order. The most significant evidence informing Ahsoka's evaluation of the Jedi came from the Barriss Offee bombing incident. Barriss articulated criticisms of the Order that Ahsoka had quietly observed for years: declining moral clarity, over-reliance on military power, and erosion of spiritual purpose. Although Barriss expressed these concerns through catastrophic actions, her critique aligned with structural patterns Ahsoka had documented through experience. The Council's immediate assumption of Ahsoka's guilt without transparent investigation confirmed the institution's compromised judgment. During her arrest and trial, procedural irregularities exposed deeper governance failures. The Jedi relinquished responsibility to the Republic judiciary, contradicting earlier statements about internal authority over Padawan discipline. Their decision to expel Ahsoka before a verdict had been reached demonstrated the extent to which public perception dictated internal outcomes. For Ahsoka, this event supplied empirical confirmation that the Order's integrity had been superseded by concerns over political legitimacy. The Council's subsequent attempt to reinstate her, accompanied by claims that the ordeal was part of her great trial, underscored their conceptual disconnection from the situation. Their inability to recognize the harm caused by their actions, coupled with their insistence that the experience should strengthen her commitment, reinforced Ahsoka's assessment that the Order lacked the self-awareness necessary for institutional correction. This moment clarified for Ahsoka that the Jedi were incapable of acknowledging structural faults. Ahsoka's departure was not driven by rebellion or emotional rejection. It was a rational response to documented institutional failures. She had accumulated sufficient evidence to conclude that the Jedi Order could no longer fulfill its stated mission and lacked the adaptive capacity to restructure itself. Her exit constituted a form of ethical consistency that the Council, constrained by political entanglement and internal decay, could no longer demonstrate. Her departure therefore represented the first major instance of an insider identifying and responding appropriately to systemic Jedi decline. While other members suspected disorder within the Republic, Ahsoka uniquely identified the distortions within the Jedi themselves. She recognized not merely the presence of external threats, but the internal deficiencies that rendered the Order unable to confront them. Ahsoka's decision to leave the Order did not represent abandonment of Jedi values. It represented adherence to those values when the institution no longer embodied them. Her post-Order behavior provides empirical evidence that she distinguished between the Jedi as a philosophical tradition and the Jedi as an administrative hierarchy. This distinction allowed her to maintain ethical integrity even after rejecting organizational affiliation. Her separation thus exposes structural deficiencies in the Order's institutional identity and highlights how the Council's failure to adapt undermined its credibility. Following her departure, Ahsoka continued to intervene in conflicts involving vulnerable populations, demonstrating that she still operated according to the core Jedi principle of service. During events on Raada, she acted to protect local civilians despite lacking formal standing or institutional backing. Her decisions were based on situational assessment rather than doctrinal restriction, indicating that the functional essence of Jedi ethics remained intact outside the organizational structure that once claimed to administer them. Ahsoka's refusal to rejoin the Order, despite multiple opportunities, illustrates her recognition that institutional reform was not possible from within. The Council's retraction of their accusations did not address the underlying issues that produced the wrongful expulsion. Ahsoka identified that procedural failures were not isolated but systematic, stemming from long-term entanglement with the Republic's political framework. Her choice to remain independent reflects an evidence-based conclusion that the Order lacked capacity for meaningful self-correction. Her interactions with Jedi during the rise of the Empire further support this assessment. When meeting with surviving figures such as Obi-Wan Kenobi and later with Luke Skywalker, Ahsoka consistently positioned herself outside the framework of formal Jedi authority. She offered guidance and historical insight, but avoided any role that resembled reinstatement. This demonstrates her continued skepticism toward institutional models that replicate the hierarchy she had previously observed to be structurally vulnerable. Ahsoka's conduct during the Siege of Mandalore provides a critical case study. Although offered the title of general, she declined the official rank while still leading troops to neutralize a major threat. This decision illustrates her understanding that military titles had contributed to the Order's collapse during the Clone Wars. By refusing military alignment, she preserved the ethical separation between Force practitioners and wartime command that the Jedi had failed to uphold. Her treatment of clone troopers during Order 66 reveals a consistent application of moral judgment that contrasted sharply with the Council's wartime pragmatism. Ahsoka sought to de-escalate rather than eliminate the clones who attempted to execute her, prioritizing investigation into their behavior rather than immediate retaliation. This approach demonstrates a commitment to understanding systemic influences, namely the inhibitor chips, that the Jedi had never fully investigated. Her conduct reflected analytical caution rather than reactive doctrine. Ahsoka's avoidance of ideological absolutism further highlights her divergence from the Order. She resisted labeling herself as a Sith adversary or a Jedi successor, instead prioritizing functional outcomes such as protecting communities and preventing authoritarian expansion. Her approach suggests an awareness that rigid ideological categories had contributed to the Order's blind spots. In distancing herself from institutional labels, she mitigated the risk of replicating the structural limitations she had previously identified. Her later involvement with early rebel networks reveals a strategic framework grounded in adaptability rather than adherence to legacy structures. Ahsoka contributed intelligence, coordination, and guidance to cells such as Spectre Group without imposing hierarchical expectations. This decentralized engagement allowed her to influence events without reproducing the institutional rigidity that weakened the pre-Empire Jedi. Her operational style aligned more closely with insurgent flexibility than with the formalism of the Jedi Council. Ahsoka's emphasis on observation over doctrine became central to her methodology. During interactions with individuals such as Ezra Bridger, she prioritized assessment of personal motivations and environmental context rather than strict application of Jedi teaching. This analytical approach contrasts with the Council's often prescriptive model, which relied on universal rules even in circumstances where contextual variation demanded tailored interpretation. Her refusal to train Ezra formally as a Padawan provides further evidence of her resistance to replicating institutional structures she viewed as flawed. She concluded that adopting a master-apprentice hierarchy during a period of instability presented ethical risks similar to those that contributed to Anakin Skywalker's decline. Her decision was informed by direct historical evidence rather than personal reluctance, highlighting her commitment to avoiding organizational patterns she had assessed as hazardous. Ahsoka's reappearance years after the fall of the Order illustrates her sustained skepticism toward institutional reconstruction. Even when confronted with opportunities to rebuild Jedi structures, she acted cautiously, emphasizing personal development over formal allegiance. Her perspective suggests that she interpreted the Order's collapse not as a singular historical failure, but as the culmination of long-term structural vulnerabilities that would re-emerge if replicated. Ahsoka consistently prioritized Force comprehension over institutional loyalty. She engaged with Force users and non-users alike without imposing Jedi orthodoxy, demonstrating an expanded interpretation of the Force that exceeded the Council's traditional frameworks. Her approach aligns with broader academic interpretations, proposing that the Jedi's collapse stemmed from inflexible doctrinal boundaries that limited adaptability in complex political environments. Her independent path offers empirical contrast to the behavior of surviving Jedi who attempted to rebuild the Order through replication of old structures. Ahsoka's alternative trajectory demonstrates that she interpreted historical evidence differently, concluding that institutional preservation was not synonymous with preservation of values. Her decisions reflect analytical reasoning based on observed failures rather than ideological nostalgia. Ahsoka's choices ultimately highlight that the Jedi Order's collapse was neither sudden nor purely external. Her early departure and later conduct provide a detailed record of internal degradation manifesting long before the Purge. The Council's alignment with military and political agendas, combined with philosophical rigidity and declining self-scrutiny, created an environment incompatible with the values the Order claimed to uphold. Ahsoka's actions consistently reflected recognition of these patterns. Ahsoka's trajectory therefore offers the earliest comprehensive evidence of institutional dysfunction within the Jedi Order. Her assessment and subsequent departure preceded the fall of the Order by recognizing structural vulnerabilities at a time when senior members continued to assume stability. Her independent path demonstrates that she correctly identified the misalignment between Jedi identity and Jedi practice, making her the first figure to fully understand the extent of the Order's decline.
Thank you for watching. Be sure to like, subscribe, and hit that share button. My main channel is Critical Analysis Hub, where I post Star Wars content about the movies. My secondary channel is Critical Analysis Hub Plus, where I focus on the shows of Star Wars. And my third channel is Critical Analysis Hub XP, where I post comic books. Be sure to take a moment and check them out. Thanks, and may the Force be with you.